episode 10 of The Accursed. This is a story you are going to want to listen to from the beginning. If you're just jumping in now, I suggest going back to episode 1 and starting there. This podcast shares some scares and frights. It may also delve into adult themes. Specific content warnings are in the show notes of each episode. Please check there so that you can honor yourself and your needs. When I first started getting these letters, and honestly, I think for most of the time I've been getting these letters, I've been pretty good about not scaring myself silly, at least after the initial shock of it wore off. The stories themselves are scary, but for a while I could put everything aside and almost forget. But these past few months I've spent a lot of time in Hazel's world. I've read and reread the stories, thinking way too much about why and how and what it all means. But lately, I've ended the day more than a few times trying to ignore this unfortunately familiar, eerie feeling I can't quite shake. The refrain in my head, whenever I start to feel weird about all of this, is that nothing's really happened. Nothing specific I could point to and say, see, this is why you're freaking out. Anything that's happened other than getting the letters has been easy to write off as nothing really, just a product of my imagination/fear. But the letter that arrived this week is harder for me to chalk up to just coincidence, and I need to explain why before I read that story to you. I know I have alluded to past experiences I've had with the paranormal. I know I haven't given a lot of details yet. I'm really not trying to be coy. Talking about what happened isn't my favorite thing. Talking about it to people I don't know, well, that is terrifying. But if my intention in doing this podcast is to figure out something that's going on here, well, this might be part of that something. I'm going to read you something I wrote about 17 years ago. It was an assignment for therapy. I wasn't living here in Asheville then. I was still out in LA. I started to talk about some of the experiences I'd had when I was younger, and my therapist at the time asked me to write one of them out so we could look at it more closely. I know this isn't really much in the way of an explanation. That's gonna take me a little more time to write it out and to be ready to write it out, but I will. I promise. There's something inside of me, and I'm not entirely sure what or why, that thinks my past matters in the whole grand scheme of these letters, these stories. And the letter that arrived this week definitely has added some fuel to that fire. So here goes. The house I lived in at the time was long. My bedroom was at one end and my parents' room was at the other. The space in between was almost all windows, and they looked out onto a big open field, surrounded by woods. There were only a few houses near us, and none of them behind us, so when it was dark, it was just dark. I was terrified of looking out of the windows at night out into that field. It was too much nothing. My bedroom window looked out over an old stone fence and right into the woods. I also never looked out there at night if I could help it. I know it sounds like I was afraid of the dark, but it never felt that way to me. I was more afraid of what I could see because of the dark, even before I ever actually saw anything. If I ever needed to go to my parents' room at night, I would stand in the doorway of my bedroom, gather my courage, and then run as fast as my little legs would carry me, never once turning my head, never looking out the windows. I don't know exactly how old I was. I think 7, but I might have been younger by a year or two. What I do know is that this was the first time I ever saw something, something that wasn't quite there. I did have other experiences before this. I just don't remember ever seeing anything before this night. So, this night, I don't really remember what led up to it. It was all ordinary. I don't know why I woke up or what I wanted, but for some reason, I needed to go to my parents. I'm assuming, like always, I stood at my door and ran. But this time, as I was running, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Something shimmery. It felt like my whole body froze in place almost mid-run. My stomach dropped, and it felt like somehow my heart both stopped and was racing wildly. I was already so afraid. I remember turning my head slowly towards the windows and seeing a person. A sort of person. I mean, definitely a person, but not alive. At least I don't think they were. We had a dog at the time who did not take kindly to people who weren't me. If someone had broken into the house, he would have been on them immediately. What I saw looked like a man. It was like he was made of dark water, the night sky. They could see through him completely. But there was a density to him that formed the lines of his clothes and the features of his face. He was tall, thin, with a beard. I remember he wore a coat, like a uniform suit jacket with silver buttons. The sleeve was ripped at the shoulder and it had a tear just below where his rib cage would be. It looked like there was a cut below his eye. I know that's a lot of detail, but how he looked is burned into my brain. And I know it's cliche, but even though I am sure I only stood there for a second or two, it felt like forever. It was impossible to look away while he was looking at me. And he was most definitely looking right at me. I think that's what was the most heart-stopping thing. That he saw me too. He looked sad, intensely sad. It sort of rolled off of him in a way that only made me more afraid. I tried to yell out for my parents, but I couldn't make myself. I could barely catch my breath. I remember it feeling like my heart was beating on top of my skin, like everything was on top of my skin. I still don't know how to really describe it. I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes, squeezed them shut, and started to run towards my parents' room. Thank God for muscle memory, because I'm sure that is the only thing that stopped me from running right into the wall. I told my mother I had a bad dream. I couldn't manage to say anything else. I don't have good answers for why I lied, why I didn't tell them. I guess I'd learned, even at that age, to keep some things to myself. It was easier, I suppose, than scaring people or not being believed. So like I said, I wrote that as an assignment for therapy. Even though by the time I wrote all of that out, I'd had more than my fair share of ghostly encounters. That particular memory haunted me for a long time. Even now, reading that, I can feel exactly what it was like to be in my body at that moment, seeing that man. For years, I thought I made it up. Even after I saw other things, other spirits, I truly thought I'd somehow saw wrong or misremembered. He looked so different from anything else I witnessed. And the way he looked at me, nothing has come close to how I felt in that moment. Part of why I was writing about it in therapy, part of why I was talking about it at all, was I started to wonder if maybe I hadn't made it up. Maybe it was as real as everything else I'd experienced. Which leads us to the story, the one that was left for me this week. I trust once you hear it, you'll understand why I had to share all of that with you. Gran laid blankets on the floor for Raleigh and I. Pop built a fire that would glow through the night. It was an Easter when everyone was home. The last one we would have, though no one knew that yet. Even Mama was there. She took my room, saying how nice it was of her to let me stay there to begin with. Raleigh was excited, wanting to pretend that we were out camping in the woods, but that was a game I wanted no part of. She begged me to tell her a scary story, but cried when I got to the part about the old piano playing by itself. Aunt Grace heard her and came out to scold me. She scooped Raleigh up and took her to stay in their room, but not before giving me a look that meant she'd whoop me if she could. I wanted to tell her that I was just doing as Raleigh asked, but I knew she wouldn't listen, let alone care. Seeing as I was alone now, I grabbed all the pillows and blankets and made a nice little nest for myself on the sofa. I fell asleep without another thought. Awoke hours later for no real reason except that when I did, a shiver of fright ran through me. I tried my best to shake it off and go back to sleep, but there was something that night that wouldn't let me settle back down, something that sang to me in the silence of the house. I don't know why I sat up. I shouldn't have. I wish to all the heavens that I hadn't. I wish I had just pulled the blanket up over my head and waited until the sun rose again. My eyes first saw my reflection in the window. The glow of the dying fire cast an orange light behind me, and I watched it dance. I was relieved to see nothing but what I expected. I went to sink back down under the covers, but my sight caught on something, someone. He wasn't far, just past the porch. He faced the house as if peering through the windows, but for that to have been true, he would have had to be unfathomably tall. My breath froze with the rest of me, but I could not look away. If it were possible for someone to be made of the night itself, that is what this man appeared to be. He shimmered like water against the dark. He wore a uniform. It clung to him as if it were wet. I couldn't see his face with any clarity, but Anguish radiated from his very being, a sadness, one I knew even if I couldn't name it yet. I started to shake with the cold and fear. I closed my eyes for a second, only a second, but when I opened them, he was there, right in front of me, in the house just on the other side of the sofa. His form blocked the fire and the room dimmed, but I could see right through him. His face was visible to me now, the lines worn into his skin, a beard cropped close, eyes shining and tortured. I could tell that his uniform was not wet, but bloodied. His buttons, silver-seeming, glinted in the dark. He started to speak, a murmur, really. It was hard to understand. I thought I heard the name of the creek that bordered the far side of the woods in a road that was clear across the country. His voice was shaky. Every so often he would take a breath, and I would hear a rattle from within him that felt like death. I watched, holding still for as long as I could. I hadn't meant to move. It was a reflex to wipe the tears that were falling down my face, but it was enough to catch his attention, enough to make him turn towards me. He looked right at me, and I could tell that he saw me, though nothing in his face betrayed the shock of my presence. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and my voice became locked in my chest. He knelt before me, and I could hear the fabric tear, and there was a rush of blood that poured from his wounds. His eyes never left mine. His mouth twisted into a grimace. Blood dripped down his face. I was too scared to move, too scared to even pull away. So when his hand reached out to touch my cheek, I felt it, cold and lost against my skin. With a sharp breath, I knew with certainty what happened once upon a cold spring, when he was forced over the mountains, and the woods called to him. A hum began to rise between us, a rumble I'd come to know all too well. He looked panicked, as if he knew the noise too. His hand reached for my throat, and the hum grew, ringing in my ears, making him stumble back onto his heels. The seams of night that had defined him began to waver, breaking apart until in a whoosh, there was only me and the fire, as it had been before. The morning came, just as sleep had finally found me again. Riley tiptoed into the living room. I watched her bend down to pick something from the floor. She crawled onto the couch with me, saying, "Sorry, sorry, sorry," but I just pulled the blanket over her, not wanting to wake up just yet. She pressed something into the palm of my hand before laying down, too. A button, silver and cold, and more familiar than I ever wanted it to be. This isn't quite the end of that story, but I need to explain something first, before we get there. On about a quarter or so of the stories, at the end, there's a flourish, a hand-drawn curvy line with 2 slashes through it. It seems pretty haphazard. I haven't noticed a pattern, like they're not on a certain type of story or something like that. However, on this letter and two others that have the flourish, there is a little more written on the other side of the paper, after the flourish. To me, it's something that the writer remembered later on, but still wanted to add. This is what is after the flourish. When Aunt Grace and Uncle Arch took Riley to church that morning, Mama had me sit on the floor in front of her so she could braid up my hair. I was fidgety, and she didn't much like that, kept telling me to settle down. I was really only playing with the button, pressing it into my palm and moving it from hand to hand. Mama saw it, I guess, and asked me what it was. I tried to say it was nothing, but she leaned over and snatched it from me. Mama froze, but didn't say anything at first. She finished my braids and had me stand up in front of her. Her eyes were fiery and her lips drawn tight. I thought she might holler, accuse me of stealing that button or something, but she grabbed my hand so tight it hurt. Her words were harsh and low. Don't you ever look at him again. Do you understand? Not ever. Promise? I nodded. Promise, say it. So I did. Mama had let me sleep in the bed with her that night and the next two, until she left to go back to wherever she had been. I'm sure you can imagine why getting this particular story has properly unsettled me. Yes, it could all be a weird coincidence. There are differences, I guess, but it feels way too close for comfort. For the record, I have told other people my story, that story in particular. I know that a few of the friends who come over for Sunday story and dinner have heard that one before. But even if this is their doing, which I really don't think it is, but even if it was, why now? I've been getting these letters for over a year, and this is the first one that has felt connected to me in a very real way. There are little things that have reminded me of what I experienced, but nothing like this one. When I read it, I ran cold. I did not want to go back inside my house. I ended up running back in, grabbing my keys and purse, and just drove around for a while. I waited until my boyfriend was on his way home before I went back too. It's not like anything happened. Home was fine, no crows that day even. And it's been fine since, though the crows are very much back. I just didn't want to be alone, I guess. I should also point out that the story that Hazel tried to tell Riley, the piano playing by itself, I'm pretty sure that was last week's story. Maybe it's a coincidence, of course, or maybe that story triggered the memory of this story. Or maybe whoever's leaving these for me is telling me that they are indeed listening. Well, that is what I have for you today, and I'm gonna do my darndest not to let my imagination run away with itself and work on trying to tell you a little more about my past. If you have any questions or thoughts about what's happening, I always want to hear them. You can email me at JoAnna@theaccursed.com. And until next week, goodbye. The Accursed is written, created, all around conjured by me, JoAnna Dane. You can find out more about the show at theaccursed.com or on Instagram at the Accursed Podcast. You can find out more about me at JoAnnaDane.com. The intro and outro song, Cathedral, is provided by Moby Gratis. Want an extra bonus story? Sign up for our mailing list at theaccursed.com, and one will be delivered right to your inbox. If you like the show, there are 2 ways you can help us out. First, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you happen to listen. Second, share us with other folks in your world who might also love a ghost story. Thank you again for listening. Goodbye.